Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the HR Tech Chat video podcast. And with me today, I have a very special guest from one of my very favorite companies, isolved. Her name is Megan Coen, and she is VP of HR Services. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you very much, Brent. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, and the pleasure's all mine. We're so happy to have you here on the podcast, and we have a really, really exciting interesting topic today that I don't think is talked enough about in podcasts. It's all about HR services. We talk so much about technology in this podcast and in this space in general with the influencers and the analysts, of which I'm one. But we don't talk about the services enough. And so I'm really looking forward to diving into that with you today. First of all, blah, I'm all tongue-tied. First of all,
It's okay, Brent.
um,
Don't be nervous.
yeah, it's funny that the host is a nervous one today. Anyway, would you please maybe, yeah, just introduce our audience to, just some of your background, what kind of led you to the role you're in, that sort of thing. I think that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been in the HR profession for a little over 15 years now. And that has been, a mixture of internal roles for about half of my career, working my way up, through the HR generalist, HR business partner, kind of HR manager track, often at, small dynamic tech startups. I happen to live and work in California. So there's a lot of very unique industry here, around tech, around biotech, that I've gotten a chance to work with very closely. And then in the more recent half of my career, I made the switch over to the consulting side. And I've really loved that transition because as an HR consultant, you get to see a breadth of problems that you
Mm.
don't get to experience if you stay at one company for 5 years of your career. So it really kind of helps to accelerate your, exposure to different challenges, different business experiences, different industries. And once I kind of caught that consulting bug, there was really no going back for me. So, I've been at isolved since 2021,
Mm.
leading the HR consulting kind of outsourcing solutions here at isolved. And I do think I agree with you. It's really exciting to be at a company that is looking at HR so holistically, because
Mm.
technology is a really critical, piece of the puzzle to help businesses, but it is not the only piece. There's people components as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great segue to sort of the perfect tee up question we have to sort of start this conversation today. But just to kind of swoop out for a second here, and just kind of set the table, I was looking at isolve's most recent report about people leaders, and it's called the Power Moves, what 500 HR leaders are doing now and next. It's the third annual HR leaders report from you guys. And by the way, I read these all the time, and they're very in-depth and they're very informative. What really struck me is that 83% of HR leaders, this I believe it's director level and above. I have to go back to my notes, and we'll include this in the blog intro that comes with every one of these podcasts. But 83% of HR leaders believe that they indeed believe that they are seen as strategic by organizational leadership in their organizations, which is really, really, I mean, that's encouraging. We've talked about this on and on and on for many years. Maybe it's working. It looks like it's working. We keep talking about it, and it's working. Um, and they also say, though, that one of the things that they're really looking to do in the coming year is, and we're already almost halfway through the year. It's amazing, isn't it? That they really want, one of their priorities is looking into outsourcing some of that
Yeah.
HR function. I mean, I guess that's a really good segue here because, we talk so much in the industry about technology this and technology that. What are some of the other things you touched on this briefly, and maybe we could dive into a little bit more, but what are some of the other things HR departments starting their journey
Yeah.
to HCM maturity, which is where I think a lot of these organizations feel like they're moving toward? What are some of the other things that they might need?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I was so excited to see that statistic as well. I think that, the HR function has really gone through such an amazing transformation just in in the short time, relatively speaking, that I've been in the profession, really turning it from, a very paper focused function, policy focused function into a strategic asset for the business. And I think that, for organizations that haven't reached that place in their HR maturity yet, for me, the most important thing that they need to keep in mind is the change management piece.
Mm,
And this is something that, my group from a strategic consulting perspective helps clients with often because, it's very easy for HR to be so in the weeds that you don't pause to step back and think about the strategy and the process for rolling out the changes that are necessary to reach those upper levels of HCM maturity. And we can almost take it for granted sometimes because we're in HR, we're in it every day, we're reading the trends reports, we're seeing the white papers, and we know that there's value in these technology pieces, but we have a part of our role is to make sure that we're bringing others along in
mm,
that journey. And I do actually have a very relevant example from a few years ago, with a client that I was doing an HR assessment for.
yeah,
And
let's
yeah,
hear it.
I love an HR assessment. It's bread and butter. It's really how I started my consulting career, and it's nice because it's like CSI, right? It's like let's
Yeah.
let's see how this happened and why this
Forensics.
happened,
Yeah.
right? Forensics, right? And I love Law and Order, so I enjoy I enjoy getting into that nitty gritty. And for this particular client, as we worked through the assessment, at the size that they were at, they were kind of pushing 150 employees and kind of pushing. So they were reaching a stage where they really needed to get some technologies and processes in place if they were going to keep scaling the way that
Mm,
they were going to. And I identified, with them that they didn't have an applicant tracking system. They didn't have an ATS. And that seemed like an easy win, right?
yeah.
Right front and center, at the volume that you're hiring, the way that you're scaling, this would be a great win for the organization. Have you ever thought about it? And they actually said, we implemented one a year ago and we had to pull it out.
Wow.
And I was like, I have questions.
Yeah, I do too.
Right. What happened? Right. Was it a tool was it not the right tool? Did you not have, executive support? What was the problem?
Mm,
And when we really dug into it, the tool was fine. It had been signed off on. Everyone at the sort of top had agreed on the value and why this was important, but the
yeah.
managers that needed to adopt it weren't on board.
Mm,
They weren't on board. And for them, it was as simple as I had to wait for a password to get reset. I didn't remember how to get in, and it was faster for me to just email you.
wow.
It was
Wow.
as simple as that, right?
Yeah.
But because they hadn't anticipated the needs of their managers and kind of brought them along in the change process,
Mm,
that issue got ahead of them, and it ended up kind of tainting the experience of the technology for some key managers that weren't willing to be change advocates because they hadn't been engaged early enough in the process. And so, we talked about how to address that, for next time, right?
mm,
Communicating your vision, using more data to kind of, show the value, and also maybe getting some champions since they
mm.
knew they had resistant managers. So change management, critical part of success.
That's a really illustrative story. I mean, yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing. It really frames it. And there's all sorts of just instances of this kind of thing happening all across the fruited plain, I guess we could say. I mean, and it really, so this makes me think, my mind is the wheels are turning now because I'm thinking, okay, we have a lot of solution providers in this space there's a lot of great technology in the space, and isolved has a great solution. We've spoken with plenty of customers that use it. um, what is isolved sort of grand philosophy or maybe strategy? And you don't have to answer this question completely because we're boiling the ocean here, but what is the sort of the rationale? Maybe that's a better word. The
Yeah.
rationale behind having the HR services, because I can see some real synergies here and some positive
Yeah.
stuff to have that HR services arm that's working sort of, in complementing, let's say, the technology stack. What's the philosophy there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a few things. I overuse analogies. I love talking about soup pots and airplanes, so bear with me. But for me, buying a really great technology is awesome. You've bought the airplane.
Mm.
Who's gonna pilot it? Who's the crew? Who are we transporting? Right?
Yeah.
Technology alone doesn't solve a problem, right? It's a vehicle to solve that problem. But the problem is you're trying to get from point A to point B, right?
Hmm.
It's not in and of itself the destination. It's just a tool. So from iSolve's perspective, and certainly from mine, there are a ton of organizations out there, both that have formal HR and that don't have very
Hmm.
formal HR, that could really use, a co-pilot, or they could really
Yeah.
use, a crew member,
Mm.
some way to kind of what we call augment their existing team with a fractional HR resource to
Oh yeah.
help them, right, to help them pilot, this great plane that
Yeah.
they've invested in. And so, we've built an incredible team. I'm very, very proud of them. We've got over 50 professionals that are experts in HR, benefits, payroll. We're helping, over 1,200 customers, all over the United States. And, we focus in a couple of areas from a philosophical standpoint.
Mm.
We have our consulting solution, which is really where we focus in HR consulting work. And I will talk more about that in a moment.
Yeah.
We also have our outsourcing solutions. So
Hmm.
we do what we call managed benefits. You could think of that as benefits administration, where we're really the ones taking the work on for the client, helping enroll people in, carrier websites, doing data management in the system. We have a similar solution that we call managed payroll outsourcing, where we can really be the doers and kind of take that work for you.
Hmm.
And then on our consulting side, we are advisors. So the way that I like to describe that is sort of think of HR in three buckets. There's the administrative work of HR, processing a background check, doing data entry, setting an offer letter. That administrative piece still sits with our clients. And then we focus in the really compliance and strategic areas. So,
Okay.
compliance might be, gosh, I want to hire this person. Am I doing it correctly? I want to performance manage this person or exit them. Am I doing that correctly? They need a leave. We need a policy. We need a handbook, that real bread and butter HR compliance work. And
Hmm.
then, the strategy piece looks different for every client, right? That example around applicant tracking, is a great one. And that's a very strategic focus that we would have in our team. And we do HR assessments for clients all the time in that strategic space.
Interesting, interesting. That's a question that I think a lot of us have in the space is we hear so much about the change management and the strategy and all of that. I'm sort of lumping those
Yeah.
together for the sake of this question, but or observation, I think, is that you gave a really good example of what that actually looks like. Because it sounds, oftentimes it sounds sort of like a catchy term, but what does it actually entail? Okay, let's do some change management. Okay, what does that mean? And you said, it's kind of like CSI, forensics. You're going in there, figuring
Yeah.
out what makes that organization tick, so to
Yeah,
speak, and then coming up with recommendations and helping them align their various people in ways they might be misaligned.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, now you were mentioning that. So I can imagine that, a lot of, let me put it this way. Yeah, there's a lot of vendors out there. They have a great technology, right? And you hear all sorts of stories, and we won't name any names, obviously, because just about every vendor has them. But you hear these stories where there was something was sold, and it was, and I've looked at a lot of these, and I happen to know that a lot of these are good systems, but they were sold, and then it was somehow implemented wrong, or the buyer misunderstood what they were getting, and it just seems to snowball from there, and it can make it look like the technology is bad when
Yeah.
it may very well be, let's say, even just good enough. I have this little theory that if your technology is good enough, especially in HCM, then if your technology is not good enough, then you have even bigger problems, and maybe maybe you're not going to be competing much longer in this space. But if your technology is good enough, then there's all sorts of other things that are almost become more important, and that are um, going to result in more customers, more happy customers. What are your thoughts around that?
For me, it gets back to that airplane analogy, right?
Mm,
If you put bad data and, bad processes into a good technology, you're going to get a bad outcome.
hmm.
And that may be, I don't mean to say that a process is bad, or that the way you've been doing something all along as an organization is necessarily bad. But I don't think there's an HR person on the planet that wouldn't say, "Oh, we've got some improvements that there's a couple things that we could, shore up and kind of improve." Um, for me, one of the reasons I love doing HR consulting in a software company like isolved is because we have the ability to not only be HR experts, but also to be technology experts in our tool.
Hmm.
So, for us, that's a core tenet of the consulting work that we do, is helping our clients maximize their investment in the technology that they've purchased and really get the most out of it. And that might mean, optimizing its configuration in a way they'd never thought before, using a feature that they hadn't thought of before. A really common example actually happens for us all the time is, we'll have a client go, "Hey, I'm getting, workers' comp audit. I need to pull a bunch of data together.
Mm.
Help, what do I do?" And we can show them, "Okay, well, this is the report that you pull in isolved. This is how we collect that data in the system and make it available for you to do. Oh gosh, you're not actually tracking this data as well as you could be.
Mm.
Let's help you set up a process so that next year when this happens again, you can be confident that that data is available, it's reliable, and you can get it out in a timely way." And that sounds like such a small thing, but for an organization or for an HR team that's already stretched very thin and is just trying to do as much as they can with their limited resources, saving 30 minutes that week can be a really big deal.
Yeah.
And that's one interaction in 100 interactions that we'll have with a client over the course of a year, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. That every single time savings is precious, and absolutely, and that results in productivity gains. And I like to think, I like to talk about, what are the productivity gains? Well, this person has that much more mental white space,
Yeah.
to actually think strategically, right? Um, you mentioned, you know, I also like analogies and metaphors, and sometimes I could take analogies, too far. Like, hey, just abandon that analogy now, Brent. Come on.
You start to
But
stretch the metaphor a little bit, right?
but the airplane thing is so good. You're right, because you could make an airplane that's is, you know that's especially easy, like exceedingly easy to fly, right? Um, but it still needs to be sort of enticing for somebody to actually fly it. And
Yeah.
so, this side of a true set it and forget it HR system, which you know, I don't even know if that's even possible. There's a state of the art of technology, right? And I think maybe you could potentially, even today, or if theoretically, probably not today, actually, having looked at the landscape, but at some point in the future, we could possibly create an HR system that's fully autonomous, right? But it makes me wonder whether we'd there would still be instances, there would be, these sort of opportunities, let's call them opportunities, where, look, this is how you can make the system better, like that, capturing the data story that you just shared. One of the things I hear about is autonomous pay, which when I first heard about it and I realized what it meant, I was really excited because I heard it a couple times. Sometimes I'm slow and I was like, whoa, autonomous pay, what does that mean? And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, oh yeah, like the autonomous cars that Google has, autonomous pay, where it's a system where you actually don't need any people tending to it. It just runs on its own. But this conversation today is making me really, really question whether we'll two things: whether we'll ever get to the point where we'll have, that autonomous autopilot. There's the airplane analogy again, actually, system, and but more deeply, whether that's a good objective anyway. Is that the goal we want?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that there's a ton of opportunity for technology to simplify compliance,
Mm.
right? And to simplify, processes, eliminate man hours by making things more efficient, right? But there's always going to be a human element to
Mm.
having humans in your business.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
And I mean that, the change management story, that I shared with you at the beginning is a great example where just throwing a technology out there and going, we're good, right? We did it. We solved this problem with technology. It undervalues the human aspect of us interacting with these technologies on a daily basis, needing them to add value to our lives, add time back in our day, and then what are we going to do with that time afterwards? So I'm
Mm.
so glad that our survey shared such a high number of HR professionals that feel like HR is being viewed as a more strategic asset, because I view that as the future of HR. The future of
Yeah,
HR is not data entry,
no.
or coming up with looking up what the policy is for New Jersey, right? That's not the future of HR. The future of HR is how are we going to be business leaders and lead our organizations into the future and leverage those technologies and those people assets as effectively
Mhm.
as we
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about what strategic HR can look like, because I'm sure that you've sort of observed firsthand a few sort of examples of this. So you go in, you help an organization maximize the newfound efficiencies that are sort of in there in the system. Now they have more time to breathe, to take a deep breath. Um, think for a second, right? Because they're not just, like all reactive, all this stuff coming at me that's operational. And now I can think, what are some of the things that you've been able to sort of help organizations do from a strategic standpoint in their HCM?
Yeah, absolutely. So for starters, I'm going to tell another story because I love a good story.
I love stories too.
So very, kind of early in my HR career, when I was a new manager, I was like a little baby manager. I had one intern that, I had responsibility over, and I was so proud of myself, that I had achieved that in my career. And my leader at the time gave me some incredible advice that really stuck with me, which was good leaders know how to delegate.
Yeah.
Good leaders know how to delegate. There's
Mm.
only so much time that you have in your day. There's only so much that you personally can do. You need to find your resources, figure out who the right person to delegate to is. And
Mm.
so for us, when I think about what are the benefits of working, with isolved HR services, to me, our clients that are utilizing us the most effectively have learned how to delegate to us
Wow.
correctly, right? And for me, we work with clients that look all different types of ways. We've got senior HR leaders that need to delegate compliance support. One of our larger customers is well over 1,000 employees, and they're in 36 states.
Wow.
And they have an HR team of 3. Well below the
Yeah.
recommended ratio of about 1.4 to 100, employees. Thankfully, all in the U.S., so it's a little bit less to me. There's no international complications,
Hmm.
but they lean on us for proactive, support around HR compliance because they just can't keep up, without using us as help. But we also work with teams who have, newer HR folks in their, folks who are newer in their career that are looking for strategic guidance and, change management support and validation that their thought process on how they want to implement something it makes sense, and that, another HR professional with a lot of years behind them agrees that that's the right way to do it. But we also work with office managers and, payroll managers who are wearing the HR hat, or owners, who
Mm-hmm.
realize that that they don't know what they don't know, and that's opening up risk for their businesses. So, HR problems don't go away just because you don't have a really formal HR team. Those problems are still there.
I,
um,
yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but you get
I
excited by
know
one
I
thing.
touch on a lot of things.
Well, we this term didn't originate with us. It's been out there, but this idea of accidental HR people. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and a lot of small companies that have grown to a certain size, they've sort of, it's almost like the not shrapnel, but it's like that what's it, the residual stuff. But
Yeah.
as they hire more people, they realize, oh, excuse me, there's all this stuff that I got to take care of in order to make sure I'm employing people correctly.
Yes.
Just like I'm dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And people take that on. Sometimes it'd be the comptroller, maybe when it comes to payroll, or it might be maybe even the founder, and sometimes they'll get to a point where they realize, okay, we need to hire somebody
Yeah.
to take over this function. And then at that inflection point, there's a hopefully, they're savvy enough to understand that they need technology for it too. They're not just bringing somebody on to kind of just roll this rock up the hill every week or whatever, right? And so it can be interesting. And then there's sometimes, we've actually looked at what isolved deployments, or isolved engagements was called it. And I don't know if HR services was involved, but there's one. It's called. We actually published a case study vignette on this, right at home, Long Island North Shore, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name right now because he has a very difficult name, starts with a Z. But great guy, he's
I
the
won't
owner.
tell him. Don't worry, I won't tell him. No.
He may see this podcast, but anyway, I'll figure it out when we post. But in any event, he's the owner. It's a franchise. It's helping senior citizens at their home, providing those types of services, and he was really extolling so he was sort of an accidental HR person that was a not so accidental people leader. And so he actually works directly in the isolved system. He has an HR person helping him. He's a franchise owner. So he's not an HR person, but he's working in the isolved system, and it's helping him to be more efficient, and so he can focus on people leadership. And again, I don't know if HR services is involved there. It probably would only help to improve that positivity even more. But that's a great example of this kind of it's HR is so much more than that operational piece, and getting away from that operational piece, getting something in place with some sort of a combination of technology and people who understand it and understand what HR is all about. That to me seems to be the key to sort of HR. Let's use a crazy word, emancipating itself from it's this administrative tedium.
Yeah. Yeah. And that gets back to what I was saying earlier, right? Where it is so easy to be in the weeds with
Mhm.
HR and feel like you're just going from one fire to another fire to another fire. But, for me, another thing that HR really needs to maintain is perspective, right? You're not going to boil the ocean in a day. You're not going to solve every problem that this organization has tomorrow. But if you're thoughtful about it, you can find where's your low hanging fruit, right? Where can you make the biggest value with the least resistance? And that could be something as simple as we need to get all of our employees the ability to ask for time off on their phones,
Yeah.
right? So simple. And that can have such a huge impact on the organization. And once you've got wins, right? Once you have shown your credibility as a problem solver for the business,
Mm,
that builds the goodwill to make bigger changes. People will be along with you because they'll remember that you solved that critical problem for them.
yeah.
You have to find those things, right? You got to find your big rocks to put it to solve first, to put in first, and then fill it in with sand. Another analogy, the jar with the rocks, right?
What I love about that is finding the small wins to build credibility, and it fits right into what I really like about what isolved says. It's helping HR people figure out those next steps. It's not thinking about, yeah, there's a journey, there's a destination, and that's inspirational, but at the same time, making it seem achievable by
Yes.
finding those next steps to really move in your journey into full HCM maturity, which is out of that reactionary sort of operational, um, uh, just that whatever you want to call it, it's just completely
Yeah.
aggressive, and just not being able to think, to being able to think and having a vision, and providing that full sort of strategic value that not to go full circle here, but getting back to this positive sort of trend in the industry where we're seeing it seems like people are figuring this out.
I think so too. I think so too. And I think the trends survey shows that. And that just makes me excited for the future of HR consulting. And
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm where I am because I want to keep, having my team support customers through that transformational journey and watching iSolve do it too, right? We're a company too. So it's
Yeah.
exciting.
Oh, oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly plenty of people are really excited and happy to see you where you are. You're doing great work over there at iSolved, and thank you so much, Megan, for joining us at this podcast today. This has been a fascinating topic. I can't wait to go live with this episode, and just thank you so much.
I appreciate your time very, very much. And I'll see you next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye bye.
Bye, Brent.